We're going to be talking about teleology now, which is a somewhat controversial topic for atheists and materialists, because teleology is the science of the purpose, the direction of things. And so, materialist will argue that there is no ultimate purpose to anything, right? That's the nihilistic position. So teleology, telos, end goal, is about direction, purpose, and final ends, the why behind things. If you're looking for meaning, you're looking for purpose, you're looking for direction, you're looking for teleology. These principles say nature isn't random drift, it's ordered activity. Beings act towards end, and flourishing depends on fulfilling the purposes proper to what a thing is. So direction, one, principle of finality. Every agent acts for an end. Natural processes are inherently ordered to outcomes. They do not drift aimlessly. They tend toward determinate results. You see this everywhere. We're agents ordered toward outcomes: food, shelter, stability, relationships, meaning. Trees grow toward light. Birds migrate with seasons. Even ecosystems have directedness. So even ecosystems have directedness. The sea sustains life. The sun provides energy. When a system is healthy, it can fulfill its ends. When it's damaged, it can't. Eyes are for seeing. Acorns are ordered toward becoming oak trees. Birds migrate in season. And so when we think about the human being, what are we for? And this is a good place to talk about causality again. Now, if you remember the four causes, right? There's everything you see has some type of information that regulates it, right? Why it's a determinate way, not another. In a animal, human being, it can be DNA code, RNA code, whatever it is. In software, it's code. In minerals, it's atomic structure. So, everything has a design. The design itself is not the thing. The design is more like the information that regulates it. And so this is the formal cause, right? It's indispensable. If you didn't have it, if it didn't exist, then the form wouldn't exist. So this is the formal cause. The material cause is the material that actually constitutes it. Where did you... I got half of my material from my mom, the other half from my dad. And you can, see everywhere. This is metal and plastic. And so the material cause constitutes whatever it is that we're examining. The formal cause regulates it, in its form. But of course, neither of those two actually produce it. There's an efficient cause and effect that actually affects the material cause and conforms the material to the formal cause. So there we have three causes. The final cause is the purpose, the reason that it exists. So when we look at anything, this microphone is here so I can talk to you, and at the same time it's it is supplying a demand in the marketplace that helps the manufacturer make a profit, right? And employ people and processes and vendors, and so people can feed their families, right? In the same way, for instance, this helps illustrate the point. If I were to break this microphone, who would be best equipped to repair it? Obviously, the manufacturer, right? In the same way, who best knows the best way to use the microphone and all its capabilities, all the different things it can do? The manufacturer, right? So in the same way, we are created by God. Everything is created by God. And so God knows what's best for us and what we're meant for. And to make a long story short, we're meant for heaven. That is what we're meant for. So how do we get to heaven? That's the question. We get to heaven by, seeking the true, the good, and the beautiful. That is something that we have to do. And that leads us to God. God is like a light. And we are like moths, and we are seeking that light. And that light, is constantly sustaining us. But at the same time, it's kind of receding us because it's like it's infinite. We're not going to get to the bottom of God. It's like a mystery. We can learn so much about it, but we're not going to exhaust it. It's never going to be, it's never going to be something that we exhaust, that we completely know everything about, right? But I'm glad you guys are with me. So that is the final cause of something. All right. Direction number 2, principle of operation. Action follows being. Agere sequitur. I'm pretty sure this is agere sequitur. So what a thing does flows from what it is. Operations express essence. This connects directly to identity through change. You act according to what you are. If you cut being from doing, everything becomes arbitrary. There's no stable nature, no stable power, no stable explanations. So hearts pump blood because they are hearts. Minds reason and will because humans are rational. An athlete trains because he's ordered toward athletic excellence. So action follows being. Being explains doing. Without ink, you can't. Without this link, explanation loses its anchor. So action follows being. Being first, action follows. All right. Direction 3, the principle of natural inclination. Being tends toward their proper goods. Beings tend toward their proper goods by nature. Living things seek what sustains and perfects them. This is why ought isn't arbitrary. If human nature has real ends, moral norms are rooted in what we're ordered toward. And yes, inclinations can be corrupted. Vices can become second nature, but they weren't natural in the beginning. They were formed by choice, habits, imitation, and wounds. So natural inclinations are there to help us do good. We all, even when we're wounded, we all desire human flourishing. So in the way that we can in the way that we can bring about that human flourishing, we will be, finding fulfillment. So direction 4, the principle of integral goodness. Goodness is fulfilled nature. Goodness is the fulfillment of a thing's nature. A being is good when it flourishes according to what it is. So goodness is objective. It's not whatever I like. Flourishing depends on conformity to what a thing is. If you want to heal society, you don't start with slogans. You start with reality, what humans are for, and what destroys them. So a healthy oak expresses oakness, strong trunk, deep roots, abundant leaves. A just man fulfills nature better than a liar or a tyrant. A virtuous man is better than Jeffrey Epstein. So this matters because if goodness is real, then degradation is real too. And we can diagnose and repair instead of pretending collapse is just a lifestyle. All right. So the principle of uniformity of nature, stable order makes knowledge possible. So nature operates in consistent and stable ways. Regularity allows expectation, induction, and science. Uniformity is what makes learning possible. If nature didn't have stable patterns rooted in what things are, you couldn't infer, test, or build anything. Gravity tomorrow will act as gravity does today. Fire burns, water quenches. Without uniformity, knowledge collapses into chaos. No science, no planning, no reliable action. And direction number 6, principle of for-cause completeness. Don't amputate the why. So full explanation often requires multiple causes. Material, formal, efficient, and final causes are complementary, not competitors. So a lot of debate collapses because people treat mechanisms as the only real explanation. That's the classic trap. They answer one why question and pretend they answered all of them. Mechanism answers how. Teleology answers for what. Metaphysics answers why being exists at all. When you confuse levels, you manufacture fake conflicts. This happens all the time. For example, evolution explains biodiversity, therefore God didn't create. That confuses mechanistic explanation with ultimate explanation. The brain causes thought, therefore meaning is an illusion. That slides from efficient causation into metaphysical self-defeat, reductionism. So evolution explains biodiversity, therefore God didn't create. It confuses different types of explanations. So this prevents the collapse where levels of explanation are treated like enemies. It keeps our worldview comparisons honest. Now, the principle of grace perfects nature. Of course, this is for the theists, for the Christian theists, as materialists won't concede of grace, I guess, if they're consistent. But maybe they'll concede for the sake of argumentation. So the supernatural does not abolish the natural. It heals what is wounded and elevates it to a higher end without bypassing freedom and responsibility. Not everyone will follow you here because this is explicitly theistic, but within a theistic frame, this principle keeps you from treating grace like a magic replacement for nature. Grace builds on nature, heals it, strengthens it, elevates it. This is why conversion is an escape from reality. It's really restored. It's reality restored and raised. So natural virtue is good. Elevated by charity becomes supernatural and meritorious. Natural marriage is good. Sacramental marriage is raised to a sign of Christ's union with the church. This matters because it explains continuity between creation, morality, and redemption. God's work is not plan B, it's fulfillment. All right, now we're going into principles of order and society, ethics and social philosophy. So, morality is real. Freedom is responsible. Social life is ordered towards the flourishing of all. Families and local communities are foundational. So this names the conditions for human fulfillment. Power must be restrained, and holiness is the true leaven of culture, renewing societies from the inside out. These principles govern how persons live together in community. They explain the foundations of morality, freedom, law, and cultural health. Without them, society collapses into tyranny or chaos. So, the principle of natural law, objective morality. Moral norms are not mere preferences. They flow from human nature and right reason, and for the theist, ultimately from God as author of nature. When objective morality is denied, morality doesn't disappear. It gets replaced by power, appetite, and social pressures, or emotivism. History is full of cultures normalizing grave evils, human sacrifice, infanticide, elimination of the weak, and then baptizing it with clean language. Once morality becomes plastic, right and wrong becomes whatever the crowd rewards or whatever the strong can enforce. And virtue has its own kind of evidence. If you practice virtue consistently, it reforms the soul. It trains desire, clarifies perception, and makes the good easier to choose. In that sense, virtue is its own reward because it makes you into the kind of man who can actually see and choose the good. So the murder of the innocent violates reason and nature, a truth recognized across cultures even when men try to suppress it. This matters because the principle of natural law rejects relativism, which dissolves justice into power or preference. The principle of freedom and responsibility. Freedom is for the good. Freedom is real, but it is not license. Freedom is the capacity to choose the good, and it entails accountability. So we assume the principle of freedom and responsibility everywhere, in courts, praise, blame, repentance, reform. Without real freedom, justice and moral responsibility collapse. And yes, you'll hear determinism, free will is an illusion, but even if we admit pressures, habits, and inclinations, freedom still shows up where it matters most, between vice and virtue. You don't have free will to never eat or never sleep. You have to eat, you have to sleep, but you absolutely have freedom in how you live: overeating or discipline, sloth or order, lust or chastity, cowardice or courage. And here's the hard truth: virtue is practice and vice is practice. Every day you're getting reps in one direction or the other. You're either strengthening freedom, the ability to choose the good, or weakening it by training yourself to default to the lower thing. For example, courts hold people responsible for crimes because we assume they acted freely. Praise and blame presupposes real choice. This matters because without the principle of freedom and responsibility, law becomes theater and accountability becomes a myth. All right, the principle of subsidiarity. Higher orders serve lower ones. Higher social orders exist to support, not erase, the proper functions of lower ones. Families, neighborhoods, churches, and local communities have priority in what belongs to them. Subsidiarity is anti-status and anti-neglect. It rejects the state swallowing everything, and it rejects abandoning people and calling it freedom. A state may aid families in poverty, but should not replace parents in raising children. This protects dignity, responsibility, and freedom at the most personal levels where reformation actually happens. All right. Order.4, principle of the common good, shared conditions for human flourishing. The purpose of social order is not factional benefit, but the flourishing of all. The common good is the shared conditions that allow persons, families, and communities to reach fulfillment, not a vague collectivist slogan and not whatever the state wants. The common good is concrete, conditions that make human life livable and human flourishing possible. When elites capture institutions, they redirect society toward factional benefit and call it progress. I mean, we've seen that. So the principle of the common good the principle of the common good is the antidote. It drags politics back to the question, does this actually serve human flourishing or just the powerful? So clean water, just courts, peace, and public safety serve all, not just the elites. This matters because it guards against corruption and factional capture by recentering society on what enables human fulfillment. All right, the principle of corrupting power. Power must be bound. Unchecked power tends toward disorder and abuse. Because man is wounded, structures of law and habits of virtue must restrain power, not merely trust goodwill. So checks and balances exist because we're not naive about human nature. But here's the hard edge. When you're at the top, who punishes you? Who restrains you when you can buy silence, shape narratives, outlast scandals, and leverage protection? So yes, structures matter, law matters, oversight matters, but under it all is the deeper claim. If there is no judge above the judges, the most powerful will tend to behave like gods. That's why the fear of God isn't soft, it's social medicine. When elites lose the fear of God, they don't become neutral, they devolve into appetite and self-worship. So pray for their conversion, not because we're naive about power, but because we're realistic about what restrains a man who believes he will never be held accountable. So checks and balances reflect this truth. No one person or office should be absolute. Prudence requires humility about human weaknesses. Governance must bind vice, not pretend it doesn't exist. All right, principles of the sacred and revelation, faith, discernment, grace. So these principles explain how God makes himself known, how faith harmonizes with reason, how revelation unfolds in the life of the church. This safeguards against two equal and opposite errors, metaphysical self-defeat and fideism and scientism. This shows that faith is credible, tested, and transformative. So that's what we're trying to do right now. We're trying to, if virtue is the mean between two extremes, and, the principle of the sacred and revelation is that mean, the two extremes would be fideism and scientism. So, principle number 1. Principle of the unity of truth. Truth cannot contradict truth. All genuine truths, whether discovered by reason or revealed by God, must cohere. Apparent conflict signals either misinterpretation of revelation or error in reasoning. Faith and reason do not contradict because the principle of the unity of truth is real. Truth cannot contradict truth. So when there's an apparent clash, something went wrong in interpretation. Either we misread Revelation or we reasoned badly. This is why a Catholic approach isn't deny verified science, it's integrate verified knowledge without letting scientific language overreach into metaphysics. For example, scientific cosmology can describe a beginning scenario like the Big Bang, while theology confesses creation ex nihilo. Those are not enemies. They are different lights aimed at the same reality. And this also blocks flattening scripture into crude literalism. Sacred language can be real without being a lab report. You harmonize levels, you don't force them to compete. So science describes the Big Bang. Theology confesses creation ex nihilo. These are complementary accounts, not contradictions. This matters because the principle of unity of truth prevents the false war between faith and reason and blocks the either-or trap that fractures people into blind belief or sterile skepticism. The principle of credibility. Public signs warrant reasonable trust. God provides public signs that warrant faith. Faith is not a blind leap, but reasonable trust in divine testimony. The principle of credibility means faith isn't I feel something. God gives credentials, miracles, fulfilled prophecy, and supremely the resurrection function as public signs. Divine verification that revelation is real. This is also where the church's method matters. If someone hasn't encountered God yet, there's not game over. You get on the boat and live this method: prayer, repentance, sacraments, discipline, community, obedience. You don't wait for perfect emotions. You enter the path and let reality confirm itself over time. For example, miracles, fulfilled prophecy, and the resurrection serve as divine credentials authenticating revelation. This matters because the principle of credibility blocks blind fideism by insisting God gives reasons, while also blocking sterile rationalism that refuses any testimony on principle. The principle of discernment of spirits, test by fruits, doctrine, and authority. Claims of revelation must be tested by conformity to sound doctrine, submission to lawful authority, and durable fruits of holiness. This includes personal discernment of consolation and desolation. By their fruits you shall know them is not vibes. It is a rule of spiritual realism. Authentic movements tend toward obedience, humility, clarity, stability, deeper charity, doctrinal conformity, and submission to lawful authority. False movements tend toward disobedience, confusion, vanity, factionalism, scandal, and pride dressed as prophecy. This applies to ordinary life too, in consolation, increased faith, hope, charity, clarity, desire for holiness. Thank God and make stable commitments. In desolation, dryness, confusion, heaviness, discouragement, temptation, don't rewrite your vocation in a fog. Keep the rule, keep the sacraments, keep prayer. Don't let desolation steal what you saw in consolation. Over time, virtue becomes more habitual and stable, less subject to every mood swing. Authentic apparitions tend toward obedience, humility, clarity, and lasting charity. False ones collapse into disobedience, confusion, vanity, or scandal. This matters because the principle of discernment of spirits protects against deception, demonic, psychological, or social, and trains spiritual maturity instead of spiritual impulsiveness. The principle of organic development. How's everybody going in the chat? Say hi in the chat, y'all. All right, the principle of sacramental efficacy. Christ acts, disposition shapes fruit. Christ himself acts in the sacraments. Grace is objective, but its fruit depends on the recipient's disposition. So this blocks two errors at once, treating sacraments as magic rituals and treating them as mere symbols. Sacramental efficacy says something real happens because Christ acts, but your interior disposition shapes how much fruit you actually receive, because God will not bypass freedom. So in confession, absolution is real regardless of feelings, but contrition deepens the fruit of grace. This explains why the sacramental life is stable, objective, and transformative without being mechanistic or sentimental or superstitious. All right, principle of connatural verification. Taste and see through lived participation. So God invites experiential confirmation. Grace is verified not only by argument, but by lived participation in prayer, sacraments, and charity. Connatural knowledge complements rational evidence. The principle of connatural verification is the medicine test. You don't prove medicine only by staring at the label. You take it properly and observe the effects. In the same way, the Church gives a way of life that can be lived, tested, and verified by transformation over time. Prayer, confession, Eucharistic devotion, works of mercy, discipline, and obedience. This isn't anti-intellectual, it's full spectrum knowledge, rational evidence plus verified plus lived verification. So a life of Eucharistic devotion, confession, and works of mercy yields tangible peace, joy, and transformation. This matters because the principle of connatural verification prevents faith from becoming mere theory and prevents skepticism from pretending you can judge a medicine without ever taking it. All right? And that is the conclusion to the Credo's Foundations framework. So just to recap, Credo's stands for causality, reality, epistemology, direction, order, and the sacred. And that is my system for first principles, okay? Now we're going to talk about argumentation. So in the beginning, we talked about truth and the way that we talked about truth being the conformity of the intellect to external objective reality. So the way the same way that my hand has to make a specific shape to hold, this sphere, my intellect has to conform in a specific way to external objective reality, and it does that by first principles, right? So we talked about how we acquire truth, about how we perceive and know about the world, how we evaluate other people's testimony and evidence, and we looked at things like the law of non-contradiction. We talked about causality, reality, identity, the intelligibility of being. And this helps us, right? But this helps us really to just make a proposition. For instance, all of these first principles can help us, say all men are mortal, right? And these first principles can also help us say Socrates is a man. But in order to say that Socrates is immortal, like therefore Socrates is mortal, we need to learn how to formulate arguments. We just made an argument right there, and There are many forms, but there really are like 5 basic ones that will occur over and over. So we should be acquainted with these 5 basic ones, not only because we are going to use them, right? If we get our interlocutor, the person we're talking to concede to the 2 premises, all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, then they have to concede that Socrates is mortal because it follows logically, right? The same will be of any other argument that we posit, and the same will be, any argument that we hear from someone else. And if we want to attack an argument, that if our interlocutor says, the ground is wet, when the ground is wet, it rains, something like that. Therefore, it rained. Well, we have to attack that argument, right? We have to say, hey, that second premise, when the ground is wet, it rains. I deny, right? It could have been sprinklers. It could have been someone washing their car, right? So we have to be comfortable with the different forms of argumentation so that we can, especially in the heat of battle, talking to someone in a debate or conversation, we have to be able to identify the different moving parts and be able to, separate fact from fiction, untangle them, and, accurately deal with them, right? So the first type of argument is obviously the most common. It's called deduction. It's a categorical syllogism. So it's a form where the conclusion must follow if the premises are true. So for instance, in symbols, it would be all A are B. X is an A, therefore X is B. For example, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. It's good. This is a valid argument. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Now, let's see another version. Let's say all Romans are humans. Socrates is a human. Therefore, Socrates is a Roman. Well, what's the problem with this one? Let's look at it again. All Romans are human. Socrates is a human. Therefore, Socrates is a Roman. So what we see here is that each one of the premises, right? So the premise has a subject and a predicate. A predicate is that which can be predicted given the subject. So, in the case of men, we can predict that they are mortal. In the case of Socrates, we can predict that he's a man, right? And so therefore, Socrates is mortal. In the case of Romans, we can predict that they are humans. This is valid. This premise is valid. The second premise, Socrates is a human. This premise is also valid. The conclusion, though, therefore Socrates is a Roman, is not valid. Socrates is actually Greek, right? So what's the problem here? The problem here is that the middle term, right? We have 2 terms here in the term that is shared between the 2 terms. So all Romans are humans, right? The term Romans is distributed. All Romans are human. Okay, perfect. Now Socrates is a human. The term Socrates is distributed in human. However, not all humans are Romans, right? There are different types of humans. And Socrates happens to be in the category that is not Romans. So this middle term, human, is the term that is shared between the 2 premises that builds the bridge, really. You see in all men are mortal, Socrates is a man. All men, right, is distributed. Distributed means that all of the members of that class or category share this predicate. And so we can make generalizations. We can, deduce from that there is not an exception. So if the premises are true, the conclusion is forced. The bad Roman example fails because human does not uniquely connect Socrates to Roman, so the conclusion is not carried. So now we have the next type of argument. There's two versions of this. This is called conditional reasonings, if-then logic. And there's let's call it a positive and a negative version. So the first version is called modus, I believe this is modus tollens. So it is basically, a form, something like if P, then Q, P, therefore Q, right? For example, if I am thinking, I exist. I am thinking, therefore I exist. All right. So this is modus ponens. This is trigger result, what I'm going to say right now. All right. So if P, then Q, P, therefore Q. If I am thinking, then I exist. Okay. If P, then Q. I'm thinking, therefore I exist. Right? If I am thinking, then I exist. I am thinking, therefore I exist. All right. This is good. This is valid. Let's look at another version. So if I am thinking, then I exist. I exist, therefore I am thinking. Why is this not true? So this bad version flips the direction. So if P, then Q, P, therefore Q. However, the bad version is if I am thinking, then I exist. If P, then Q starts the same as the other one. Q, therefore P. And that doesn't work because I exist, but I could be sleeping, right? So I wouldn't be thinking if I was sleeping. I could be under the influence of narcotics or something. It doesn't necessarily follow that, it doesn't necessarily follow that if I was, it doesn't necessarily follow that if I am, I am existing, I am thinking. So this is modus ponens, trigger result, and this next version is modus tollens, no result, no trigger. So the form is if P, then Q, not Q, therefore not P. So for example, if the intruder were a stranger, the dog would have barked. The dog did not bark, therefore the intruder was not a stranger. So, if I pull the trigger, the pistol fires. The pistol did not fire, therefore I did not pull the trigger. So this is valid. If the intruder were a stranger, the dog would have barked. The dog did not bark, therefore the intruder was not a stranger. Now let's look at another version. So if the intruder were a stranger, the dog would have barked. The intruder was not a stranger, therefore the dog did not bark. If the intruder were a stranger, the dog would have barked. The intruder was not a stranger, therefore the dog did not bark. So this fails because not P does not guarantee not Q. The dog could have not barked regardless. So we're saying that there was an intruder when we say the intruder was not a stranger. This might not be the best example, sorry. Because the intruder could have been a stranger, and the dog could have not barked because it was sleeping, for instance. All right, so inference to the best explanation. This is one of my favorites. What it is, this is especially good for especially tricky tricky arguments. Basically, when I try to do reasons for God, I'm trying to do an inference to the best explanation, because you're not going to get, deduction is not going to, I mean, you could if it works for you, but to get a skeptic to believe in God through deduction is pretty hard. So inference to the best explanation, IBE. What is it? So we picked a hypothesis that best fits the whole pattern compared against live rivals. The form would be something like, there's data D is observed, hypothesis H makes D expected. The other rivals fit worse, therefore H is the best current explanation, provisional. So until further notice. For example, the car is wet, right? And the street is wet, and so is the car. But further down, the street is not wet, so that fits the car wash better than rain. So let's do it an even better one. The road is wet only near the car. Nearby ground is dry. If someone washed the car, that localized wetness is expected. If it rained, widespread wetness is expected, which we do not see. Therefore, washing the car is the best current explanation. Now, a bad one would be IBE jumps to one cause, which would be like the road is wet. If it rained, the road would be wet. Therefore, it rained. So this fails because it ignores rival causes and ignores the full pattern. IBE requires rivals on the table. You have to, IBE, if you're doing an inference to the best explanation, you have to compare explanations in order to be able to compare and conclude one is better than the other. So IBE requires rivals on the table and a pattern comparison. Localized wetness fits car wash better than rain. The bad version treats one possible cause as if it were the only cause. And a similar one would be the cumulative case. Converging lines. So this is several lines of support converge on a conclusion. No single line must be decisive. The form is basically evidence 1 supports conclusion C, evidence 2 supports conclusion C, evidence 3 supports conclusion C. Therefore, C is reasonable and probable. Multiple lines of reference converge on Jesus existed historically. So Jesus probably existed historically. If a person existed historically, we often find multiple independent lines of reference. Friendly, hostile, internal traditions. Jesus is referenced across multiple lines: early Christian testimony, non-Christian hostile traditions. Therefore, it is reasonable, probable that Jesus existed historically. A bad version, that non sequitur, that does not follow, this would be a scope jump. Some late sources are late or unreliable for early biography. A late gospel, that is like a Gnostic text, is late. Therefore, Jesus did not exist. So just because there's fake news about Jesus doesn't mean that Jesus did not exist. Because if you start arguing that Jesus didn't exist because the Gnostic texts of the 2nd century are clearly, fraud, and fictional, made up. Well, that doesn't say that Jesus didn't exist. We have evidence from the 1st century. All right. And okay, so that is basically the 4 forms. So we have, you could call them 5. So we have the syllogism, we have conditional reasoning, modus ponens, trigger result, and modus tollens, no result, no trigger. And then we have IBE, inference to the best explanation. And we have a cumulative case. And now we're going to talk about testing conclusions. And this framework I called proved. So the first thing we're going to do when we get a syllogism that we want to evaluate, I think I'm going to call it a night, and I'll get to that tomorrow. And then tomorrow is my birthday, actually, so say happy birthday. There's nobody here.